Yes, students, just now we discussed about Newland's law of octave, his system of classification. What was the law given by Newland? Now, I'll discuss about the limitations of Newland's law of octaves. Limitation means disadvantage, because of which this system of classification was also rejected. Then came Mendeleev's periodic classification. Mendeleev's system of periodic classification of elements. Okay, so what was the limitation? What was the disadvantage in Newland's law of octaves? So at the time of Newland, 56 elements were known, and it was assumed by Newland that only 56 elements existed in nature, and in future no new elements will be discovered. But later on many new elements were discovered and that could not fit into his table. So this was one of the main disadvantage. At the time of Newland, how many elements were known? 56. And he assumed that only 56 elements existed in nature, and in future no new elements will be discovered. But later on many new elements were discovered which could not fit into his table. Okay, this was one of the disadvantage. Second disadvantage, his system of classification, what Newland did, he arranged the elements in increasing order of atomic mass. So he found that the first and eighth element properties were similar, like eighth note of musical scale. But it was applicable only for lighter elements, means up to atomic mass 40, calcium, till calcium, atomic mass 40. For heavier elements, means atomic mass greater than 40, it was not applicable. So this was second disadvantage. His system of classification, Newland's system of classification, was applicable only for lighter elements, means elements with atomic mass up to 40, that is up to calcium. After calcium greater than atomic mass 40, the system of classification was not applicable. Now every eighth element, their properties were not similar to the first one. Okay, then the next advantage, you also had to place two elements in the same slot. Like cobalt and nickel, he kept in the same slot. And also he had to place some dissimilar elements in the same column. Like this cobalt and nickel, two elements in same slot he kept. Second thing, these two elements, their properties were not similar to fluorine, chlorine and bromine of this column. Because the elements of one column, their properties should be similar. But the properties of cobalt and nickel were not similar to fluorine, chlorine and bromine of this slot, of this column. So this was again a disadvantage. Next, again he had to place two more elements in the same slot, cerium and lanthanum. And their properties were different from chromium and yttrium, where it was placed. So this was a disadvantage. Next, iron. Many of the properties similar to cobalt and nickel, but they are placed far away. They should come under the same column but placed far away. So after atomic mass 40, the system of classification was not applicable. Every eighth and first element, the properties were not similar. Okay. And next disadvantage, noble gases were not discovered at the time of Newland, when Newland did the classification of elements. Later on, when noble gases were discovered around 1900, then every eighth element, the property was not similar to first one. Then the first and ninth element, their properties were similar. Because the noble gases were placed at the last, then the first and ninth element, their properties were similar, not first and eighth element after the discovery of noble gas. So these are some of the disadvantages of Newland's law of octave, the system of classification. Because of which the system of classification was rejected, and later on Mendeleev came forward to do the classification of elements. So students, in the next class I will discuss about Mendeleev's system of classification, periodic classification of elements. Okay.